Time for a spiritual awakening. Time for a spiritual awakening.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Spiritual Awakening 101. My name is Reverend Jerry Yaakov, and I'm your host. Today we're going to be looking at looking within, taking our own inventory, really turning over to God our shortcomings and defects of character, things that have stood in our way, let's say, between us and having a God-centered life, a life filled with joy and happiness. The only way to do that would be to take a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We have to look with real honesty at what it is within us that may be tripping us up. Self-sabotage is a universal problem because most of us really are guided and listen to our ego. We're interested in doing what we think is best for us. However, God's law is that we are to be guided by God's guidance, not the ego. And the difference is God takes into consideration the well-being not only of ourselves, but everybody else. In other words, there is a way, and let's call it the infinite way, rather than the finite way that we've been doing. The infinite way is God's way. God guides us so that we benefit and everybody around us, family, friends, colleagues, and the world at large, benefits from the thoughts that we have when they're God-centered. Also, our speech is God-centered, and our behavior and our actions are God-centered. When all of this occurs, because we make a decision to look within at where we've been remiss and where we've been maybe impulsive and listening to the wrong thought system in our mind. You know, there are two thought systems in everyone's mind. There's the ego thought system, and then there's the spiritual thought system. Well, the default thought system of the ego has been running the show, and most of us have not even been aware of it. So what we want to do is firstly become aware of the price that we've been paying, the unmanageability of our lives, the sheer powerlessness that we've devoted ourselves to by listening to our thinking, which is self-will driven, egoic. Once we get that aha, that first step, my goodness, there's another way, a better way. I can listen to a voice within me that's not egoic. It's God-centered. It knows because it's omnipresent and omniscient and omnipotent, everything that I've searched for, and because I'm finite with my ego thinking, I didn't know. Now I can turn within, and it is a matter of turning within, going into the silence, going into prayer and meditation, just silencing the thinking for a while, the raucous shrieks of the ego, letting them go. That in itself is a lifetime process because we're so used to listening to this default voice that crowds out the still small voice of God. Well, anyway, once we decide, okay, there's got to be a better way. My life has been unmanageable. And really, I get a sense that finally, I myself alone am powerless. But there is one within me, which many call God of many names. But there is a God within me, a higher power, if you will, that has the answers and the solutions that I'm looking for. It has the perfect thoughts because they're love-based. The ego thoughts are fear-based. And so I've been coming from a survival and fear-based motivation. And that always calls unto itself more reasons to be fearful, more reasons to attempt to survive. And we don't want to simply survive. We want to thrive. We want to be a victor, not a victim. Victims can survive, but that's not a very celestial uh, way of living, a sacred way of living. There's nothing very high consciousness about that. It's simply survival. But it also has within it the seeds of another calamity, another level of unmanageability. Because part of what the ego wants us to do is repeat old mistakes over and over again. And it deludes us into thinking that somehow by repeating these old mistakes, thinking, speaking, acting with the ego, it's going to turn out better. And of course, that is delusional and insane. So and thank God, thank you, Spirit, that there is another way. But it's something that we have to open our hearts and our minds to. It's not something that comes into our thoughts and descends upon us without our making a decision. So it's very important to recognize we have the power of choice. We didn't recognize that we had been choosing wrongly, but now we're going to be choosing rightly. We're going to be choosing for the spiritual side of our minds. It's all there. It's in the subconscious. It's in the conscious. It's in the superconscious part of our mind. All of this is available. And once we recognize this, nothing can hold us back because the ego was simply an illusion. So it's nothing. And that nothing, that illusion of the ego thinking, can never hold us back again unless we decide in its favor. Unless we decide to do the same old, do things repetitively, and resist the power and the infinite intelligence of God within us. We were created not by the ego, not by ourselves. We didn't create ourselves. We are the created holy child of God. And God, the Father, Mother, Heavenly God, wants only the happiness and the best for us. And once we make that decision to listen, to really listen in the quiet and the stillness, be still and know that I am God, your whole life will be transformed. This is the key to the kingdom. These are the keys to the opening of the prison cell door that we've been behind, whether it's an actual physical prison or one simply in our mind while we're in the world at large. It doesn't matter. When your mind is imprisoned, you're in an addictive state. It may be drugs, it may be alcohol, it may be criminal behavior, it may be hurting people, thinking that when I hurt others, I can take for myself and benefit. But of course, that's all bad karma. And you can't benefit and gain by others' losses at your hands, at your thinking. This is very clear. The basis of spiritual awakening, spiritual raising of consciousness is to recognize that I and you, of course, we are one in the spirit, one in the holiness, one in the divinity. And that's our true essence. So to take from myself, meaning away from the other, in a delusional state that I'm going to gain from that, your loss is my addition, is insanity. So we have to know that God's will restores us to sanity. It's been there all along. So this is a restoration process. It's not something that we gain for the first time. It's not something that is foreign to us. This is who and what we are. We are magnificent, holy, sacred children of an omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent Father, Mother, God in heaven. And so our true home is in heaven as well. And once we recognize this, then we can live in the world and recognize that we're not of the world. That's a lovely thought, isn't it? While we're here, in the body, in the world, in the circumstantial, in the world of effect, there is an opportunity for us to think at the level of cause, true cause. And that, of course, is God. God is the true cause of everything. God is everything. God is everywhere. God is all powerful. And we have access to that. Now, all the rules of the world go out the window. So whatever and I'll just use myself, but use this for your own mirror, if you will, and start thinking about how this affects you. I found that what I was searching for in the world, making my way, was really false idols. They never satisfied me. If I got the job that I was hoping for, or I got the relationship that I had been dreaming of, or I got a significant raise, so the money was better, I still had within me a state of fear, which is the ego. And the fear and the anxiety and the depression would always spoil whatever I received or obtained in the world. But again, I didn't know that I'm in the world, but not of the world. And as above, I can live so below here in the world. But I have to place my mind in the above state of thinking. Once that's accomplished, those thoughts then supplant the negative thinking in my subconscious. I replace the negative thinking with, let's call them seeds, positive seeds of love, positive seeds of caring and compassion, positive seeds where I am ethical to a level that I've never been ethical before. Positive seeds of optimism. I know things are going to work out because I'm being guided. I have a God GPS system, not an ego GPS system. And the ego GPS system took me into the ditch every time because I was settling for these false idols. But what I'm finding with God GPS system is that I am inherently provided for. My safety is within, not dependent on the circumstances in the world. I bring a sense of holiness to the world because my mind is in the state of heaven, the highest level of love and consciousness. And that is really an overview how to beat the ego system, which keeps 99.9% of the people probably in the world in a state of negativity and depression and fear. And certainly negativity is not a lending of hope. Hope is a great standard for our consciousness. I am totally hopeful that my life will continue to get better. I know that my money and my relationships will improve. I know that my health will improve if I need my body to sustain me in the purpose of securing God's resources for the benefit of myself and everybody else. That's the difference. I'm seeking for myself and everybody else now. And that opens up my thinking to God. God can be whatever you like as long as included in that definition for yourself is godliness and unity with others. That's a state of heaven. That's a state of oneness. And when we recognize that we really do live in a state of oneness with each other, with all sentient beings, animals, minerals, vegetables, all of us are really one in a tapestry of life. We're then more concerned with others' well-being as well as our own. Can you imagine how under a heavy weight I've been living, by not recognizing that I'm living for everybody and everything, not just for myself. I had to prove, I thought, because the ego was teaching me this, I had to prove that I was okay and that I was a winner and that I could gain at the expense competitively of others. And I still can fall into that trap. But what I'm finding is that the more I practice with my spiritual awakening, the more I practice looking at those defense mechanisms that I put up between me and everything else that I'm one with, those defenses never worked, and they no longer serve me if they ever did in any way work. I let them go. I'm letting shortcomings and defects of character go to the higher power that gathers them up and shines the light on them so that the darkness that they are is shown away. It's a beautiful system, and it's a system that really is all-inclusive. I'm not concerned with what your religion may be or what your spiritual path might be, as long as included in your religion is a unity of mind. As long as your spiritual path is one of loving and kindness, that you forswear, get rid of the idea of me, and that if I can benefit, I'm not so worried about the other guy. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to wear a hair shirt or that you have to be a missionary and go to third world countries. I don't know what God would have you do. That's an interesting question. But isn't that for each of us to learn as we sit in the silence and ask for guidance for God's will and the power to carry it out? Once we decide that we are the created, not the creator, but we have all of the attributes of the creator, who made us in its likeness and image, and said that we were made good and very good, we can then go out and be the missionary that our lives were destined to be. That doesn't mean that I go to third world countries necessarily. It may be that I'm kinder to my family, to my children and grandchildren. I'm more apologetic when I make a mistake and I recognize that I've been wrong. If I'm working, I'm more concerned with the team and not being the star at the expense of somebody else so that I can step over them, for purposes of more money or more prestige. Those don't turn me on anymore. And as I had said earlier in my talk, they never really did once I accomplished some of these ego goals. Now, there's nothing wrong with being on a winning team, as long as you include others with you, and God will take care of that. So we ask for the decisions that God would have us make in the workplace, in the home, in our own affairs, with our own minds, in our own bodies, in the world that we occupy, in our neighborhood. Look and see where you can make a difference. But firstly, go to your higher power, which is God, and ask with simplicity and humility, what is it that I can do? How can I best represent you, God? How can I be your channel of love and kindness? How can I be your messenger? It's a mighty purpose to be a messenger. Everybody wants to be the originator of the message rather than simply the messenger. There's that silly statement, don't shoot the messenger. I'm only delivering the message. But this is of a whole other order. If you're the messenger of God's word, If you are as Jesus was, and as Moses was, and as Krishna was, and so many of the avatars and Atmen and so forth, the prophets, mystics, the gurus, what are they doing really? But they are connecting and saying, it's not I, but the Father within that doeth the work. And I'm a messenger in the channel. And the clearer we are as a channel, the clearer the message comes through us, the more enlightened we are. And that will appeal to you. Firstly, maybe to your ego. I hope not. It'll really appeal to your heart and who you really are. That's what we want to do, is become our true self, not become the phony self that we put together with a costume and a mask and all kinds of trappings at the level of form so that we look good. That wasn't the idea. That wasn't the origination of Adam and Eve. They were to be in the Garden of Eden truly as God's representation, God's friend, God's, I don't know what else to say, but at the level of form, and I think I'm stretching the analogy here, but we were to represent godliness. Where did it come into our minds that we were to represent the anti-godliness? And that's what the ego stands for. Ego is edging God out. How did we fall for that? Well, it was selfishness. It was the idea that God gave us free will, and all of a sudden we thought, well, with free will, I can get more of my share. And maybe that means less for the other person, but then be that as it may, I'm not that concerned because I'm an ego. I'm a self running wild. And we find that you can't sustain that. Oh, it'll work for a while. We know people who are super accomplished, but are they in their hearts and in their minds God's messenger? If they are super accomplished simply for themselves and to look good at the level of form, I promise you that there is no sincere happiness and fulfillment. It can't work that way. However, accomplishment isn't the measurement, the criteria. It's the peace and serenity within our minds and our hearts, and the love that we bring to our fellow man, to our fellow humanity. That's the accomplishment that we want. Do you know all the sophistication of technology and everything else that is being spawned more and more rapidly as the years go by is not in any way dignifying the spirit that you and I possess. It seems to reduce the importance of the spirit so that what we're looking for is an acceleration of accomplishing things just for the sake of accomplishment. I'll give you an example, and this, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a medical person, but I would say that when we've edged God out, we're inviting illness and sickness, both at the mental and the physical level. And so now there's a mad scramble for scientific and medical advancements to take care of the symptomology that edging God out is producing, so that the sickness and the illness can somehow be undone, not by God, because we're still in an ego state of mind, but by our own advancements. You know, this pandemic that we're just coming through now, fortunately there is a vaccine that's been developed, several of them, and people are taking them and benefiting. Well, that's all well and good, but let's look at, again, and this is a spiritual opinion at the level of metaphysics, the reason that there is illness in the world and pandemics that come and go is because we've edged God out. God is perfect health. God is perfect wholeness. God is perfect body, mind, and spirit. So we wouldn't get into any of those problems where we would have to accelerate the scientific advancements at the level of form and all the fear that goes into when are we going to get the vaccine? When are we going to get the healing agent? When are we going to find the right, healer? The healing is within. And I'm not in any way saying if you aren't prepared to heal solely at the level of mind, use the medical world and the health provisions that are available. But know in your heart that God can and will direct you at a level that you're not afraid of to use both the world and the metaphysics of heaven to heal the mind and the body. Once that occurs, you'll never go back to that same lower level of consciousness. And you'll want to be more and more aware of the kinds of things that led you down that illness garden path so that you don't become ill anymore. This is very important, and that'll be maybe a topic for another episode of this spiritual awakening. But I just wanted to point out that the source of the solutions is always God. And then the manifestation of the solutions can include science. It can include groups. It can include environment. It can include meditation. It can include what we do with the body. But we want to dedicate the body and the brain and the mental facilities to God first and foremost. I can't emphasize that enough. And then you will read the right book, find the right advertisement, listen to the person who knows the answer because they've gone through it. It's going to happen in a way that you're going to benefit. So many of these richness gurus have said they studied people who became rich. And then they said, I've replicated what these people who became rich did. Well, if you're going to replicate what rich people think and what they do, make sure that they are people who are honest and of the utmost highest integrity. And you'll find that your riches will be well spent and well received and well spent. I'm getting into a little different topic now, and we're almost at the end of this wonderful episode. I'm just so grateful that you've joined us. I hope you found it helpful. Step one is always to look to God. Be still and know that I am God. Step two is to then practice with all your heart and mind with humility. Do what God suggests and guides you to do. And in that, you will be saved. Your life will be at the highest level of consciousness, and you will know happiness and glory. Well, that's the end of this episode. Thank you to the NECAT Network. Shalom to every one of you. God bless, and we'll see you next time.